Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for listening to Mr. Laxton's video on these Algebra II 5.2b notes. All right, so today we're looking at our essential question is how do I solve quadratics by factoring? All right, so we're going to look at kind of in the next part of chapter 5 and 5.3 and different those things, we're going to look at some different ways to solve quadratics. But for the first one, we're looking at factoring. All right, so let's take a look here. Greatest common factor, and this is always a good thing to keep in mind when we're factoring. We always have to look for a greatest common factor first. So greatest common factor is a monomial factor that is common to every term in a polynomial. So when factoring, always look for a GCF first. All right, so here, if we look at this example number 1 here, we have to look, what can I factor out of this guy, and how do I factor it? So before, we'd take 8 times 60, multiply that, put that in the top of the diamond, and go, right? But now we see that, hey, I can see that 8, 28, and 60, I can see that 4 goes into each one of those. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor out a 4. So if I factor out a 4 out of 8x squared, I'm going to have 2x squareds left. If I factor out a 4 out of negative 28x, I'm going to have negative 7x's left. And here I'm going to have negative 15. Okay, so I factored that 4 out of there first. I have to do that every single time first. All right, so now I go through here and I have to actually multiply this guy, this 2 and this negative 15. So now I have 4 and I have x squared minus 7x minus 30. Okay, so I can put that in the diamond is negative 30 and negative 7. Two things that multiply to negative 30 add to negative 7 is going to be negative 10 and 3. So now this guy becomes 4 x minus 10 and x plus 3. Okay, so now I always have to remember here that I have to divide these guys by that original a value. So that is my original a value. I got to divide by 2, divide by 2. So now if I bring this guy up here, I got some Christmas colors going on here. I have 4, x minus 5, and here this 3 over 2, that 2 comes out in front, so I get 2x plus 3. All right, so always look to factor out that 4 first, and that just kind of stays in front throughout the process. All right, so what we're looking at today is the zero product property. Okay, so the product of two factors is 0 only when at least one of the factors is 0. So if I look at this is the big thing here. If a times b equals 0, then either a has to be 0 or b equals 0. Okay, that makes sense. If you have two things, you're multiplying together, they have to make 0. One of those two things has to be 0. So that's what we're going to look at today. All right, so solving by factoring, we're going to factor the quadratic equations, and then we're going to set each factor equal to 0 here. That's the main part. All right, so for this one, if I factor this guy, notice that this actually has an equal 0 here. So that's when you're asked to actually factor and solve is when it's equal to 0. So if I look to factor this guy, my a value is 1, so I can just toss this right into the diamond. I get 21 and 10, so two things that multiply to 21 add to 10 are 7 and 3. So I get x plus 7 and x plus 3. Okay, still equals 0 now. But now, really the only new part today is that you have to set each of these equal to 0. So I'm going to say x plus 7 is equal to 0, and x plus 3 is equal to 0. Okay, so now if I solve for x, I obviously have to just do a little quick part for each of these. Subtract the 7, subtract the 3, I get x equals negative 7, and x equals negative 3. Okay, for these you're always going to get two answers, and we're going to talk about that throughout the rest of the chapter here is how many answers we should get. All right, so there I solved that guy by factoring. Okay, next one, it's not equal to 0, it's equal to 7, so I got to subtract that 7 over. So now I'm going to get 4x squared plus 12x minus 7 is equal to 0. Okay, now I have to factor this guy, so I'm going to look here. I have to multiply the 4 and the -7, so I'm going to get x squared plus 12x minus 28 is equal to 0. Okay, now I can put this guy into the diamond. Whoa, where did I go there? I still don't know where I went. All right, and I can put -28 on the top and 12 on the bottom. Find out what two things multiply to -28. Add 12. That's going to be 14 and -2. Okay, so here I come over. I can look at, hey, this is going to be x plus 14 and x minus 2 equals 0. Okay, but I remember I have to divide each of them by my original a value, 4 and 4. 14 over 4 simplifies to x plus 7 over 2. And this turns into x minus 1/2 equals 0. So now I have these two. I have, if I move my 2's out in front here, I have 2x plus 7. And I have 2x minus 1 equals 0. Okay, so now what I have to do is I just have to set each of these guys equal to 0. So if I go through here, I got 2x plus 7 is equal to 0. All right, so I minus that 7. Divide by 2. I'm going to get x equals -7 over 2. Here I'm going to have 2x minus 1 is equal to 0. So I'm going to add that 1. Divide by 2. X equals 1/2. Okay, so those are my two answers there. So I know I got a lot of work in a little space there, but you should get x equals -7/2 and x equals +1/2. All right, so factor it, set those guys equal to 0. Okay, so here it says the solution, zeros are the solutions to a quadratic equation are called the zeros because the quadratic function is 0 when x equals these values. These are the x-intercepts. So that's when we were graphing those before and we had our x-intercepts as our p and our q. Those are what our answers were, or our zeros. Okay, so now we're just going to look at one more example here. It says find the zeros. So I pretty much just plug in 0 for this guy instead of y and go through here and factor. So here, if I factor this, I have 2 on the top of that diamond, 3 on the bottom. Two things that multiply to 2, add to 3 are 2 and 1. So now this turns into 0 equals x plus 2 and x plus 1. All right, so now what I have to do is I just have to set each of these guys equal to 0. So I get x plus 2 equals 0 and x plus 1 equals 0. Subtract the 2, subtract the 2, subtract the 1, subtract the 1. I get x equals -2 and x equals -1. Okay, so those are my two answers. All right, so main thing here when I'm solving quadratics by factoring, the main thing here is that I have to factor each of these equations and then I have to set them equal to 0. All right, so good luck. Come find me if you have any questions and we will see you soon.